Do you remember the Amazing Spider-Man movies? The movies that came out between 2012 and 2014? Yeah, so I've been holding off talking about the Amazing series in this way because every time I revisited this script, it always felt like I was at a funeral, just sadly looking at what it was and what it could have been. Something that's been criticized to death by a bunch of YouTubers, myself included. If you wanted to know why these movies are fundamentally broken on the basic levels of filmmaking, then please check these videos out. And it's sad, because I do have a soft spot for the Amazing Spider-Man series, flaws and all. No one really bothers to talk about the themes of these movies because they're too busy kicking them while they're already down. So I'm not hoping to change anyone's views on these movies. I'm not here to convince anyone that these films are the best Spider-Man films. I'm not sure if I could convince myself that, but rather just talk about why Andrew Garfield's character Spider-Man isn't as bad as everyone says it is. And yeah, I know there's a risk of me looking like a fool just for defending Andrew, but at least you'll know that I died trying.
No, please, please.
First things first. I think one of the most powerful things that came from this series was its theme of overcoming hopelessness and growing up. Peter gets his powers, gains confidence, beats the bully, and gets the girl back to back. Like he hits this high point in his life where he feels like he's on top of the world, damn near the first act. That's a pretty gutsy move for a character like Peter Parker. Honestly, that dramatic change from being a quiet wallflower to an outgoing guy may throw some people off, but I think it helps to highlight the theme of hopelessness. Peter immediately loses his uncle shortly after. Then he loses his girlfriend's dad. He loses his dad's friend. He loses his girlfriend. Loses his best friend. Then he really loses his girlfriend for good. The way the director and Sony wanted to tell the story of this Spider-Man is actually really interesting when you look at the other guys for comparison. Tobey's Spider-Man gains his powers pretty early on and beats up the bully. Then he feels a little bad for doing what he did. Then he gets happy again. He happily beats up a wrestler, loses his uncle, kisses the girl, breaks his friend's heart, gets to meet an idol, breaks his friend's heart again, loses the idol, gets the girl, and then actually loses his best friend. Or how about Tom's Spider-Man? He meets an idol when he's 8, he presumably loses an uncle off-screen, gets to fight alongside his idol, loses his trust, becomes an Avenger, dies, and comes back in Endgame. Probably. The storytelling behind both Tobey and Tom's version seems to be a series of varying degrees of highs and lows of their lives, spread out within each of their movies. Whereas Andrew's is more as one whose life starts at the highest point it could possibly be. And then things take a turn for the worst and just plummet downwards the worst way possible. It's as if Peter's life in The Amazing Spider-Man gets progressively worse and worse as time goes on. Nothing remotely positive ever happens to him following the first act of the first movie. Now, doesn't that say something about this character? Sure, being Spider-Man has its downsides. A lot of downsides, actually. But I'd imagine there are some cool sides to it too. But no. This series is dead set on showing these powers off as a curse, and skim right over the parts that make it look like a gift. That's why you don't get awe-inspiring moments like the train scene in Spider-Man 2, or the rubble scene in Homecoming. You don't get glorified, uplifting moments that's normally associated with the Spider-Man character. And I think that narrative structure complements the darker scenes where things are dimly lit and it's just Peter being Peter. That's another thing I noticed about these movies. My favorite scenes are when things are quiet, or when not much music is playing. Not when the actors are just spitting out the drivel the studio wrote for them, where there's no blaring music or "for you." Not even the scenes where Spider-Man's swinging all over New York. I really like the scenes where it's just people being people. These scenes are usually dimmed in lower light settings, probably to complement the darkness of Peter's downward spiral as Spider-Man, to show that this isn't one of those types of things that should be glorified. It explains so much as to why these are the most down-to-earth scenes, why they're so emotionally powerful. It's shown in its realest, darkest, ugliest forms. One of my favorite scenes in not just the Amazing series, but all of the Spider-Man movies, is this scene. Peter's just sitting there in the corner after his uncle just died, listening to Ben's voice one last time. And I don't know, maybe it's just me, but that just feels like me. It feels like something I would do because it's like something I've done when my grandpa died. No, he wasn't gunned down. No, it wasn't over chocolate milk. No, it wasn't because I had spider powers but didn't use them. It was just because I was sad and felt like remembering him. And the death of Gwen Stacy doesn't really need an explanation on why it works.
Hey. Hey. You're okay. Stay with me, stay with me. Stay with me, stay with me. You stay with me. Gwen. Gwen! No, please, please.
The sheer emotion Andrew brings in this one scene transcends the studio's determination to bring the film's quality down. You feel that weight of Peter regretting not leaving Gwen out of his life, not keeping the promise he made to her dad. Naturally, this shocks Peter to the core and he quits being Spider-Man. It makes him pessimistic. If he can't save the people closest to him, how much more for those who are farther away from him? If you can't save anyone, why be Spider-Man? Maybe that kind of plays into why a lot of people don't like these movies. We don't like seeing Spider-Man losing so much. We like to believe that things will get better when things get tough and borderline unbearable, even though that's not how life works all the time. And maybe Spider-Man wasn't meant to be portrayed this way, or maybe he was. Loss has always been a staple to the Spider-Man character. That's what grounded him, that's what made him relatable. And it's this theme of pessimism that I think is actually pretty compelling. Pessimism isn't maturity. Throughout both The Amazing Spider-Man and The Amazing Spider-Man 2, Peter's actively making dumb mistakes. Bullying the bully, mocking the guy who mocked him, not keeping his word on picking up Aunt May, not keeping his word and staying away from Gwen. In other words, his mistakes are kinda childish. They're mainly just repeated mistakes that he continues to do time and time again. It's that reluctance to move on and learn from his mistakes that shows his immaturity in its ugliest form. He's living in this fantasy world where he thinks by ignoring the consequences of his actions, they'll just magically go away. It's a twisted view of optimism, where he hopes he can have things the way he wants them, despite all the signs being there telling him, just stop. We see his guilt of being around Gwen in the form of her ghost dad. It bothers him, but he doesn't actually do anything about it. And due to his failure to respond, she dies. He cries, they mourn, he quits, Rhino yells. Kid comes out, he gets inspired, he comes back, they approach each other, black screen. I think it's important to note how this Spider-Man, despite all of the character's inconsistencies, stays somewhat consistent through one tiny little detail. The lesson.
It's easy to feel hopeful on a beautiful day like today. But there will be dark days ahead of us too. There will be days where you feel all alone. And that's when hope is needed most. No matter how buried it gets, or how lost you feel, you must promise me that you will hold on to hope. Keep it alive. We have to be greater than what we suffer. My wish for you is to become hope. People need that. And even if we fail, what better way is there to live? As we look around here today, at all of the people who helped make us who we are, I know it feels like we're saying goodbye, but we will carry a piece of each other into everything that we do next, to remind us of who we are, and of who we're meant to be.
Gwen's speech during her graduation kinda feels contrived. Why she's talking like she's gonna die right then and there, I'm not sure. But it's what gets Peter out of his hiatus, and it's honestly where the true lesson of the entire franchise lies. Peter's taken back a lot of what he's done. He's broken his word multiple times, but the only thing he actually learns in this entire series is that he shouldn't give up hope. And for all of the things Sony did, of all the things the studio executives and producers that prioritized selling toys over making a well-made film did, for a Spider-Man story, not giving up hope is a pretty freaking great message. So I guess the question is, why am I doing this? Why am I defending the Amazing Spider-Man series? To be honest, I'm not really sure. That part that loves Spider-Man wants to embrace it. but that part of me that likes coherent films makes me feel weird about it. Maybe it is just my bias towards the Spider-Man character. That's probably what makes me feel so frustrated with these movies. They have this thing that I can recognize, but it's buried beneath blatant studio interferences and a rushed story. I've made it pretty clear Tobey Maguire was, and still is, my favorite live-action Spider-Man. I know I've said how much I appreciate and have high hopes for the future of Tom Holland's Spider-Man. They've both made large impacts on the character. Yeah, Andrews was no Raimi Spider-Man, he was no Avenger, but he didn't need to be. There's still something in there that I can empathize with. I can still see myself in his shoes. There's something in there that is still very much Spider-Man. I guess what I'm trying to say is, Andrew, thanks. You made a pretty kick-ass Spider-Man.